Welcome to The Common Bridge, where policy and current events are discussed in a fiercely nonpartisan manner. The host, Richard Helppie, is a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and columnist who has over 1 million listeners around the world. His podcast and YouTube show draws guests and audiences across the political spectrum.
Hello, welcome to The Common Bridge. This is your host, Rich Helppie, with our guest today, Father Thomas Reese. Father, welcome to The Common Bridge.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Rich.
So glad that you're here. The Common Bridge, of course, is available on most podcast channels. Just look up Richard Helppie's Common Bridge at YouTube TV, Richard Helppie's Common Bridge YouTube TV channel, and now on Substack as well. Please register at Substack for deeper content, newsletters, custom columns, and more. Also, of course, at richardhelppie.com for a free subscription. Today, we're going to talk about recent writing from Father Thomas Reese, who's got a great perspective on many of the issues going on today. One thing that attracted me to him is a recent column that he wrote. We'll be discussing that. But, before we get going, Father, our audience likes to know a little bit about our guests, and tell us a little bit about you. You've got quite a background. Where did you grow up, and what's been your career arc, and what kind of jobs have you had?
Well, I just celebrated my 77th birthday, but I grew up in Southern California. Spent my summers as a beach bum on the beach, but then entered the Jesuits in 1962. And during my training as a Jesuit priest, I also worked to get a degree in political science. So I have a doctorate in political science from the University of California Berkeley. So I've always been interested in religion and politics and the mix of the two. So this makes for interesting times.
Indeed, I have to think you were a fish out of water in all of those places. With you were the only one with that. You've written books, authored columns, and you had some pretty big publishing jobs as well. America Magazine, National Catholic Reporter. What were some of the highlights from those roles?
Well, yes, I have had quite a varied career. My first job actually was as a lobbyist for a tax reform group, because my doctoral dissertation was on the politics of taxation, and that was a lot of fun, but not very successful. We certainly did not reform the tax code. So I went from there into journalism and worked at America Magazine, where I wrote about politics, about the U.S. bishops, about the Vatican, all sorts of things. And I really enjoyed doing that. It's, the role of a general journalist is just a lot of fun, because you get to write on whatever you're interested in. So I've enjoyed that quite a bit. I was editor of America Magazine for 7 years. My proudest achievement, I think, was bringing it into the digital era, creating a website and getting it going in that into the 21st century. So that was a lot of fun. Now, as I'm aging and slowing down a bit, I write a column. So at Religion News Service, I'm a columnist there at religionnews.com. And there I write on all sorts of things that have connections to the Catholic Church or religion and politics. So it's been a varied career over time, but it's one that I've enjoyed. And as a priest, I've tried to help out on weekends at parishes where they need help saying Mass and hearing confessions. So that also is a very joyful part of my life as a Jesuit priest.
You certainly haven't been a man to shy away from controversy, and your writings have a lot of clarity, and I think we're fellow travelers in that regard. Indeed, my brand promise on The Common Bridge is that everybody should find something to not like in every episode because I try to give it a 360-degree look and I don't mouth the talking points. Let me just say this. One of the things that made me want to look you up and get you on the show here is that you wrote a column and its title is Someone is Killing Republicans and Trump Voters. And we will have a link to this at Substack and also at richardhelppie.com. Kind of a provocative title. What's the paper about, and who was the audience? What made you decide to write that?
Well, what originally stimulated me was back when President Trump was attacking the whole idea of COVID and vaccination and that sort of stuff. And I scratched my head and I said, boy, it's going to be a real problem if his supporters listen to him, because they're going to get sick. And a lot of them are going to die. And about a year later, the data started to come in. And it's quite clear. If you look at, for example, at counties in the United States that went 60% or more for President Trump in the 2020 election, and compare those with counties that went for Joe Biden 60% or more, the death rate in the Trump counties is almost 3 times as high as the death rate in the counties that went for Joe Biden. And there's only one explanation for that, and that is that the Trump voters are not getting vaccinated. And it's quite clear that people who aren't vaccinated get much sicker from COVID and die at a much higher rate than those who are vaccinated. So, the tragedy here is that, the leaders of the Republican Party and Trump himself are killing their own supporters. I mean, it's totally, it's mind-boggling when you look at this data and look at the situation, the reality that's out there, and it's ironic. The more the liberals and the Democrats talk about the need to get vaccinated, the less the Trump supporters and the Republicans think it, are supportive of it. They think it's a plot of some sort.
Well, look, we know that the clarity that we have. By the way, I did health data for decades. That was my business, and I actually called the death rate from the COVID a month before the CDC did, and published it. The guests we've had on our show clearly are people that brought to the fore that the vaccines have had an effect on mortality. And the preponderance of the evidence at this stage says that there is a strong correlation between those that are vaccinated and those that avoid death. As we know now that not necessarily will someone be immune, but certainly they're going to have an easier time of COVID if they get it. That's well established at this point, and so we can just stipulate that. But look, I'd like to go over some of the stats, but I did some looking in preparation. So the city of Detroit, for example, voted 95% for Joe Biden. 95%. Their vaccination rate as of 3 days ago is 35.36%. Okay. So I said, okay, now I don't think they're listening to Sean Hannity. Contrast that: New York, 73% vaccinated, Los Angeles, 75.6. Chicago, surprisingly, it's up to 65.3 are fully vaccinated, but only 50% of Black non-Latins are fully vaccinated. Okay, now Alabama, kind of a stronghold for Trump, 48% fully vaccinated. And then Missouri, very interesting, 53% of Missourians are vaccinated. And in St. Louis, also 53%. And it's a nice mid-sized city, 300,000-ish people, about equal numbers of black and white people. And Biden won 82% of the vote, but it's the same across the state. So I'm, and we of course saw in the run up to the election that the shoe was on the other foot, right? Democrats were saying that the vaccines, can you trust them? Early in the pandemic, we had Nancy Pelosi going to San Francisco and saying, don't worry about this virus. There's nothing to it. I think Donald Trump failed miserably. But I think that the Republicans and the Democrats have politicized this. And the kind of statistics you and I are talking about aren't being reported in the traditional media sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a real problem in getting vaccinations into the Black community. There's because our public health service is so weak in this country.
Oh, yes,
compared to other countries. There's a great need for it. I mean, this is the sort of thing that you just got to get out there and have the programs. Part of it is also, poor people don't want to take off work to go get vaccinated. And they hear from people, well, you might be sick for a day or two. That means, I'm going to lose 3 days of pay? They're really worried about the economic consequences of that because their employer is not going to pay them, while they're out sick. So that's been one problem with in poor communities. And let's face it too, the Black community has been suspicious of the white medical community for decades because of the Tuskegee experimentation and other things like that. So there's a lack of trust. Now, what you need to get the vaccines into the Black community are Black ministers out there pushing it and Black doctors and nurses. They got to see people who look like themselves out there pushing that, talking to them, people that have credibility in their own community. That's the same thing with Trump people. If you and Republicans, if you want to get them vaccinated, don't send a liberal in to tell them. Send conservatives in to talk to them, and local people. They're local doctors. They're local nurses.
I mean, wouldn't you agree, though? It shouldn't be a black-white, right-left issue. This is about science, and I think when I look at the serious breakage that we have in the country today and the polarization, it wouldn't be illogical for people to be skeptical of the united media talking points. All right, there's been so many false stories floated, so much misinformation. It seems to me it'd be logical to be resistant to it. And you bring up public health, and I'm in 100% agreement. Our public health system is very weak. And this was, I thought, an opportunity for us to come together, but we went and we split politically very early on. And I had on my program Dr. Martin Kulldorff from the Great Barrington Declaration, who was very prescient about what would happen with societal lockdowns. He said, we're going to extend the pandemic. We're going to open the door for more variants. We're going to damage kids that aren't in school. We're going to disrupt the economy, and we're going to have a mental health crisis, all which is played out versus what following the public health protocols of protect the vulnerable and let other people go about their business with appropriate masking, hand washing, vaccination, and the like. So it just boggles my mind that it becomes partisan, but I understand it. And I don't know if you'd agree with this at all, but I will throw it out to you that this partisan divide that we have that is stimulated further by journalistic malpractice. And you've been a journalist. There's very clever omissions. There's outright falsehoods. But I think the big thing is the people that are doing the reporting, they don't bring the skepticism about claims made by politicians that they need to. it's kind of tribal, right? It's
Yeah.
this guy saying it, so we're not going to challenge him. You, as an observer of this, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's a serious problem. I mean, the difficulty, of course, in the United States today is, when I grew up, there were three TV stations.
Yeah,
People got their news from NBC, CBS, or ABC. We watched Walter Cronkite. And if Walter Cronkite told us to get vaccinated, we probably all would have gone and got
sure.
vaccinated. Today, it's a cacophony of voices out there, and each group only listens to their own. And so it reinforces the views of each one. So you got to find other ways of getting the message out. Religious groups, for example, can be very important. The Catholic Church has been pushing, vaccination and the importance of it. Most of our Catholic schools, they simply tell the parents, your kid has to be vaccinated if he wants to go to our school. You can't. It's tough to get away with that in the public schools. But that's one of the reasons that Catholic schools have been able to stay open and have less people coming down with COVID. We just simply tell the faculty and the students, you got to be vaccinated.
Yeah, well, public schools have done that forever. With
Sure, on other things.
whooping
Yeah.
cough, diphtheria, tuberculosis tests, measles, mumps, rubella vaccination. They've been very strong about that. But those were done at different times. Those requirements were put in at a time of more trust in the political system, in less polarization, in more media integrity, or at least we thought. And now we've got outright censorship going on. And so people are saying, I'm listening, but I don't know what I should believe.
Yes.
And in recent days, what we've seen is, there were voices throughout I'm calling the media unity, the people that are in the reporting business, all kind of scoffing at the notion that natural immunity from a prior infection didn't offer protection. And there were voices saying, no, wait a minute, that's not true. That's not what the data says. And in recent days, now this, corporate reporting organizations are finally leaking that, maybe this post-infection protection works and lasts longer. And, but we weren't in a position to say we don't know.
Well, that's the real problem. Nobody wants to say we don't know. In fact, when they didn't know how much, getting infected would, protect you into the future. And you won't know. You can't know until you've got some data. Well, that means, okay, people, we got to wait 6 months. We got to wait 9 months to find out. People don't want to hear that. People want answers. But I would like to go back to something that I think is important,
Okay.
because of the kind of writing I do, and that is the voice of the religious communities. The churches have to get out there and push this. And let me give you an example of the kind of effect it has. It's fascinating when you look at Hispanics, for example. Hispanic is a tough group to get vaccinated too. But what the data shows is one of the groups with the highest rate of vaccination are Hispanic Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic Catholics, much higher vaccination rate than Hispanic evangelicals, because the message they're getting from the Catholic Church is get out there and get vaccinated, protect your family, protect your community, using the buzzwords that work with the community. And it's coming from trusted voices. The trouble with the Hispanic evangelicals is the Hispanic evangelical ministers have been corrupted by the messaging from the white evangelical ministers who have, just bought in to this anti-vax messaging. So this is, I think churches can have an effect. One of the problems, of course, is ministers are afraid to say anything too, because if
Sure.
they look out on their
Yeah.
congregation, if they get up there and say get vaccinated, they're apt to have, tomatoes thrown at them. So because of the partisan nature, they don't want partisanship in their congregation, and yet, and so they're afraid to tell people what's actually good for them. So
And look,
it's a real problem.
it is. So there's partisanship and censorship and journalistic malpractice has now invaded the church. And because if it's holding people back, when what others are doing and something we're trying to do on this program is to say, what are the facts? It's a balancing of the risks, right? It's risk mitigation. So where is the CBS, NBC, ABC, I don't care, one of the cable channels bringing on a panel of immunologists, physicians, and saying, okay, tell us how these vaccines work. Okay, I've done that on my program with James Baker, and it made me confident to become vaccinated because I thought the risk of getting the disease at my age versus the risk of an adverse event, it really made it a no-brainer. Okay, now to be fair, we don't know what the 5-year effect is because we haven't been out there 5 years. But as of now, so far, so good. And we can't have those reasoned dialogues because side A goes this way, side B goes that way, and the journalistic, or people that should be doing journalism, sees one set of talking points or set the others. And we're prevented from doing things that are entering just now the corporate media, used to be referred to as the mainstream media. The difference between hospitalized from COVID, hospitalized with COVID. Now, by the way, I'm a healthcare data guy with pretty good contacts. I couldn't get the data. I want to know what was the admitting diagnosis. We're finally now getting that two things are emerging, that most of the deaths are dealing with 4 or more comorbidities. Okay, so even when we adjust for age in these populations and adjust for political affiliation, nobody's gone through there and said, what are the complications of comorbidities? Okay, we know obesity, asthma, weakened immune systems all cause that. And so when people aren't hearing the full story, they're going to pull back, in my estimation. And then think about this. What I kind of think is the biggest whopper in this whole thing. Remember what the media was telling us, that this virus definitely, absolutely did not originate in a lab, despite the happenstance there was a lab designed to study and manipulate deadly viruses in Wuhan. It's like, and I'm not a scientist. I had a scientist on the program who said, this is definitely zootonic. It came from a bat or a pig or something. Okay, because I don't have the depth to understand that. But now we're saying, yeah, well, maybe it came out of the lab. So you can see, doesn't it make sense that people are going to be skeptical?
Yeah, I'm a social scientist. I love data. I'm with you all the way.
You and I are like that. Yes, we are.
Yes, but at the same time, a couple of things. The media is a business, as you say, corporate.
Sadly.
And so they're going to watch, how many people are continuing to watch our program. And the more data you give people, the fewer people that are going to keep watching your program. People want yelling and screaming. They want to be entertained in the news. They don't want to be educated. This is part of the failure of our education system. We need to educate people to be learners, to take their civic responsibilities seriously. So that's one thing I would say. What we found in some of the surveys is that, for example, poor people and Trump voters don't hate rich people. They hate elitists. They hate elites. They hate the professionals. They hate the lawyers. They hate the doctors. They hate the social workers, because those are the people who are always telling them how to live their lives and how to raise their children. So if you present those people, as the voice to convince these, it ain't going to work. You've got to have people from their own communities, who say, I lost my brother. I lost my sister. I lost my mother because, I wasn't vaccinated and I brought the disease home to her. Don't make the same mistake I did. The other thing is, I wish, our privacy rules these days mean that we can't get a camera in and watch somebody die with a ventilator because we respect people's privacy. We can't do that anymore. So we sanitize this whole thing. Well, all we have is, we have statistics, or we have talking heads. We don't see people dying. It's like warfare. We don't see people dying. The news, we'll have people interviewed, but we don't see people bleeding out and dying on television. We don't do that. But I think that's what convinces people, not statistics. As statistics convince you and me, but I'm not sure they're going to convince the people who are not vaccinated today.
Well, look, I think your broader point is that we need to treat people like intelligent human beings and say that, look, we have a virus here, and there's a risk. And to your point about it's a terrible death. Okay, it's a horrible, horrible ending. We've had people on, Rob Castellou from Trinity Health talked about what an awful death a COVID death is. And Brian Peters from Michigan Hospital Association, who has a very national role too, talking about the burnout of healthcare workers witnessing these deaths over and over again, and the distress in the families. Um, these are all a real part of this story. And I just think if we were able to talk to people to say, it's all part of the story. Here's the balance of the risks. Okay, we know that there's infections around the heart, particularly with certain demographics, but yes, that's treatable. All right, and that if we don't address that, we just give rise to a lot of fringe players saying, exaggerating either the efficacy or the risks of the disease or the vaccination. When again, today, clearly higher vaccination rates correlate with lower deaths. They're terrible deaths. What I like about the vaccination rates and the death rates, they're both binary. You either got vaccinated or you didn't. You either died or you didn't. It's not, tests are really immaterial. Hospitalizations, a lot goes into making a decision about an admission and a discharge. But those two things, there's undeniable correlation. There is a creeping correlation around the comorbidities and complications. We think we're pretty solid on that. And today, when people are revisiting what did we do right, what did we do wrong, and just in recent days, the realization that we probably should have manufactured the therapeutics faster. That is coming along for people that the vaccines didn't work for, didn't get vaccinated for one reason or another, but can we treat them faster? But again, that public dialogue of what are the facts, where do we go from here, has collapsed in favor of we're going to caricature this demographic this way, and we're going to, because we don't like them, we're going to attribute all these bad attributes to them. And over here, we're absolutely right about everything. And they're both doing it. And as a consequence, we're stalled. And I just want to punctuate the point you made that the news outlets are saying we're going to stimulate this group and make them mad at these guys, or they're going to go, we're going to stimulate these guys and go the other way. I was driving and listened to Fox News on one channel, and then I went over and listened to CNN, and I literally started laughing out loud because their guests both talked about how the other side was criminal. Okay, they had to get the word criminal in there, and it was nonsense on both sides. But that's where we are.
My point is that the people who can communicate with Trump supporters need to look like the people who stand behind Trump during his rallies. That's the point I want to make. Those are the people who can communicate, not people who look like they're from Yale or Harvard. They have to be people that that they can identify with. They can say that he looks like a neighbor. He looks like my brother-in-law.
On the campaign trail, Joe Biden, to his credit, said, look, these people that like Donald Trump, they're not nuts. He said, they're my neighbors. They're the people I grew up with, that our government's failing them. We need to listen to them. Okay. I'm going to stop there, but he did say it. And that's what I'm saying. We all share a humanity. And for us to be divided by our ancestral heritage, for us to be divided by our station in life, by our region, by the pigment of our skin, by our gender, that to me is the damaging foundation. And the pandemic went right in on top of that. And it's just given, if one thing should have taken us in a different direction, it should have been a virus that gets
everybody. I would
everybody.
just make one nuance to it.
Splintered us further.
And that is,
it's madness. I don't
when
understand.
You're communicating to different groups, you're going to have to do it in different ways. We cannot have a homogenized message that goes out to the public. I mean, look at Coca-Cola. Look at all the
yes, sir.
They know, when they're advertising in one neighborhood, they know how to do it in one neighborhood, and they do it differently in another neighborhood.
Right.
And that's the point I would make in terms of trying to message on public health issues, whether it's masks or whether it's vaccination or these kinds of things.
That's a beautiful example, because Coca-Cola doesn't come out and say, you either drink Coca-Cola or you're stupid. And because that wouldn't be a very good way to sell Coca-Cola. Yet we're trying to sell a life-saving
no, that's fine. Let's go.
Therapeutics and diseases. Father, anything else on this topic? Because I really want to kind of jump into schools a little bit, because all right, great. And just broadly, what do we know about schools and the impacts of the shutdown and public schools?
Well, there's no
versus
question
parochial schools,
that
and when
kids have suffered.
Been pondering this question. What kind of things have you been thinking about?
Not being able to go to school in the classroom. Some places have done virtual education better than others. I think, frankly, a lot of the private schools have done it better than most of the public schools. Sometimes it's just because they have resources. Sometimes it's just because they're smaller and more flexible, and know how to adapt. And some teachers had already been familiar with computerized education and things like that. So, but the bottom line is kids are suffering from not being in the classroom, not interacting with their peers, not interacting with their teachers, missing the whole social life, the interaction. I mean, teachers are telling me that when students come back now after being away, they're immature. They're a year behind in their maturity and their growth. And so it is quite, it is problematic. Yeah. I think today, I'm no expert, but, listening to the people who are, it seems to me that if we require vaccination, and if, we put on N95 masks, I think schools would be pretty safe places to be in today. Now, of course, January, as everybody is telling us, is going to be just an awful month. Now, yeah, everybody's hoping it's going to peak quickly and then go back down. I don't think it's going to peak in January. I think it's going to continue into February, and hopefully by the end of February we'll see it going down everywhere. But it's like a wave. It takes time to get across the country. And, it's going to peak in New York sooner than it's going to peak in the mountain states, because it's getting to the mountain states later. So every, situation is different. But I think I agree, try and get the kids back into school, but make sure they're vaccinated, make sure all the faculties and staff are vaccinated, and get those N95 masks out there for them. And I think then this will be, this will be controllable. It won't be perfect, but life is never going to be perfect.
Well, I agree that the kids need to get back in school. I know Sweden's experience, they never closed schools, zero deaths, and they done better on the second and third waves. And, we can't undo those policy decisions that people made. Um, but I'm hopeful that kids will get back in school. And I've worked with a number of schools, and as you go through various socioeconomic strata, it gets very, very challenging. And to your point about the immaturity, a principal at a high school told me he has 3 freshman classes right now because the young people don't have the experience of going through a couple of years, and they're the upperclassmen now. So, Father, this has been a great conversation. I hope you'll come back and talk to us about
Well, I've
education
enjoyed it.
and journalism and the role of the church as an important part of the fabric of our society, um, uh, teaching us, unifying principles of love and charity and all of the good things that come from a religious foundation. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to chat about or make mention of?
No, I think I think we've done pretty good.
We've been talking today on the Common Bridge with Father Thomas Reese, a fascinating conversation with a learned man with a PhD in political science as well as his priesthood within the Jesuits. Great conversation today. Please consider subscribing on Substack or at richardhelppie.com. And of course, the Common Bridge is available on most podcast outlets and on YouTube TV. This is Rich Helppie with our guest, Father Thomas Reese, signing off on the Common Bridge.
Thanks for joining us on the Common Bridge. Remember to rate us, review us, and comment about what you heard today, and recommend us to your friends. Visit us at richardhelppie.com and sign up for special promotions. This broadcast was produced by Stunt 3 Multimedia and is available on YouTube and all podcast directories. All rights are reserved by Richard Helppie.